All right, today we're diving into a source with a pretty explosive claim that the whole anti-mining crusade of former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte was, well, a carefully crafted illusion. So let's dig in. So it all kicks off with this quote right here. You got to remember, back on the campaign trail, Rodrigo Duterte was this fiery, populist figure, and he went hard against the mining industry. People loved it. He really sounded like he was going to be this big environmental champion. But was it real? That's the big question this source we're looking at today asks. The argument it makes is frankly pretty bold. It alleges that all that tough talk, it was just a show, a performance to cover up what was really going on. Okay, so first up, let's get into this major contradiction. The source basically paints this picture of two different Dutertes. You've got the public guy, the environmentalist, and then the private one who is allegedly protecting the big mining players. So the main idea here is that all those promises he made in public, the source says they were just for applause, to get people on his side. But behind closed doors, it claims his administration was actually doing things that helped out the powerful mining elite. It created this total policy whiplash for everyone watching. All right, so how does the source build this case? Well, it starts by zooming in on a really key person in Duterte's cabinet. And the allegation is a big one. A massive conflict of interest, supposedly hiding in plain sight. And that person is Carlos Dominguez III. Now, as finance secretary, this guy was one of the most powerful people in the Philippines. But here's the kicker. He was also the co-chair of the council that oversees the entire mining industry. Think about that. He's the tax man and one of the top regulators all rolled into one. And that brings us to a number, 5,000. Why is that number important? Well, according to this source, that's how many shares in Philex Mining, we're talking one of the biggest mining companies in the country, were listed under Dominguez's name. And not just for a little while, but for decades. So on paper, the guy in charge of regulating the industry was a shareholder in it. So this table here kind of breaks it all down. You see his powerful government jobs on one side, and on the other, those 5,000 mining shares in his name. Now his defense, it's interesting. It basically came down to a technicality. He said, look, those shares weren't mine. They were a gift from my son way back in 1967. They were just sort of parked in my name. And this is where it gets really interesting, right? It's the technical defense versus the political optics. The source points out that, okay, maybe his legal argument holds up. Maybe he wasn't secretly a mining tycoon. But the perception, the optics, were just terrible. The guy in charge of policing the industry looked like he had skin in the game. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. The source now zooms out from the cabinet in Manila and takes us right into Duterte's own backyard, his political stronghold in Mindanao, and it starts looking at his family. And what it claims is pretty stunning. It alleges that in the Duterte's home turf, mining wasn't just happening in spite of them being in power, it was happening because of it. The claim is that the family was connected to these mining networks in all sorts of ways. We're talking campaign donations, protection rackets, and even, allegedly, outright stakeholding. This next part is really heavy. We're now getting into what the source itself calls the ugliest stain of these alleged policies. The very real and often violent human cost, specifically for the country's indigenous communities. And the argument here is just stark. It claims that when indigenous Lumad communities in Mindanao tried to resist, when they stood up to protect their ancestral lands from mining companies, they weren't just brushed aside. The allegation is they were actively targeted, that state force was used to literally clear them out of the way for these mining interests. And the source lays out what it calls a formula for how this was done. It's a chilling 4-step process. Step 1, you red tag the Lumed community schools, calling them rebel training grounds. Step 2, you use that as the reason to shut the schools down, which also breaks up the community's leadership structure. Step 3, you displace the community, which is now scattered and disorganized. And the final step, the ancestral land is now empty and ready for mining operations. So after years of what the source calls this complete doublespeak, it claims that toward the end of Duterte's term, the pretense was just dropped. The mask came off. And official government policy finally, openly matched the pro-mining agenda that was allegedly there the whole time. And this timeline really shows you that policy whiplash in action. I mean, look at this. You start in 2016 with all this tough talk. By 2017, you even have a ban on open-pit mining. But then, fast forward to 2021. Citing the need for pandemic recovery, they did a complete 180.
First, they lifted a 9-year ban on new mining agreements, and then, just a few months later, the ban on open-pit mining was gone too. Just like that, the pro-mining stance became official government policy.
So after all that, what's the bottom line? What's the final verdict from this source on the legacy of those 6 years?
Well, the conclusion it reaches is a pretty powerful reframing of the whole situation. The argument is that Duterte was never really anti-mining. Instead, the source claims he was anti-competition, that he was only against the mining companies that weren't connected to his friends, his family, or his financiers. The goal, it alleges, wasn't to stop mining, it was to control it.
And this quote right here from the source, man, it just sums up the entire argument in one single blistering sentence. It really leaves no doubt about its final assessment.
So at the end of the day, this source argues that the true story here isn't in the speeches. It's in the policy reversals, it's in the paper trail, and most importantly, it's in the stories of the displaced communities. And it leaves us all with a much bigger question to think about, one that goes way beyond this one case. How often does what we hear from the podium hide a completely different reality?